Hi everybody, Shannon and Karen with Wandering Out Yonder, and today we are again in Pine Grove Furnace State Park, but we're here to learn about the history of the Ironmasters Mansion. Today, Andre Weltman, who is a historian, and he's also the chair of the Friends of Pine Grove Furnace State Park, is going to be doing a history tour of the Ironmasters Mansion. So anyhow, we got invited to attend, so here we are today, right?
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we are. We're looking forward to it. It's going to be pretty cool. So thought you guys might like to come along. All right, so there's a little sign out that tells you a little bit here. And you're supposed to be meeting up on the front porch. And again, this dates back to the early 1800s, possibly earlier than that. I'm not sure yet. I guess we're going to be finding out. And we're going to be finding out again, as I said, about the history of the building and the area. We are here waiting on the front porch for the tour to start. As you can see, there's some people that have showed up, so we're glad to see that. It's a rainy day. It's been raining for
what feels like weeks.
Yeah, a lot of rain. So it's nice to see people showing up. Anyhow, when we get inside, Shannon and I are going to do the best we can to share with you all of the knowledge that Andre is going to be sharing. And we hope that you guys enjoy it. We really do. We think it's really interesting, the history of this area. And we've been curious about the mansion ever since we've been inside. Well, as long as we've been coming out here. It's always been a curiosity for us. So,
right.
Anyhow.
We've showed you kind of what it is today. We are really looking forward to some of the history of why it's here and what was going on before now.
Right. So, all right, here we go.
So, welcome to Pine Grove Furnace State Park and to the Ironmasters Mansion. My name is Andre Weltman. I'm the chairman of the Friends of the State Park, which is a nonprofit affiliate. We're a chapter of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, which is based in Camp Hill and has around 4 dozen friends groups like ours across Pennsylvania state parks and a few state forests, including the Michaud State Forest has a friends group. That's the forest that surrounds us, but was once owned by the Iron Company. The building we're at is the third building to serve as an Ironmasters Mansion, possibly fourth or fifth, we don't know, but at least the third. It was constructed over an almost 2-year period from 1827 to 1829. So usually we just say the 1829 Ironmasters Mansion. So what is a Ironmasters Mansion? Well, this is the residence for the, if you will, chief executive officer and owner-operator of an iron-making operation like Pine Grove and many others across early America. There may have been many investors and part owners of an operation like this, but traditionally you've got one person, and it's always a man, who's the Iron Master, and then his family. They would have lived here probably with a lot of other people squeezed into this building. We have around 30 people on the tour today. It's going to seem a lot smaller when everyone's inside. Some of the rooms are not very large. Even though it looks big from the outside, it's smaller on the inside. So, this building is up on a hill. Turn around for a minute and look that direction if you would. You're going to see in front of you the Paymaster's cabin, as we call it today. That's a rental cabin for the state park. It sleeps 6 people. But what it originally was is the company clerk, the company Paymaster's residence and office. Very important building where they kept the money and the important business records and the wooden forms from prior iron casting jobs. And beyond that, if it wasn't for all those trees, which would not have been here 200 years ago, you would be able to easily see the top of the iron furnace itself. It's only 170 yards from the corner of this building to the furnace. Now, I have to ask this because it amazes me. People come to a state park named Pine Grove Furnace and have not always seen the furnace. You can go back and forth to the general store and the campground and somehow not realize it's there. So how many of you have seen that furnace, even if you didn't walk over to it? Okay, pretty much everybody, not absolutely. So it is a 33-foot tall man-made volcano. In the very early days of this furnace, which would probably be in the 1770s, there's some uncertainty, but certainly before 1781, that furnace would have been glowing at night. So here we are pretty close to it. If you were in the upstairs bedrooms facing that side of the building, it would have been probably very bright at night. I bet they had thick curtains. So if you've ever lived in a city apartment and had a street lamp right outside your bedroom, you know what that's like. But we're up on this hill so close to the industrial operation and all the smoke and the noise and the light because the Ironmaster, the owner-operator here, is literally overseeing the operation, okay? So it's a direct sort of industrial control of things. And that's not the model of capitalism we have today, right? Most factory owners don't have a nice house immediately next to a smoky, stinky factory of some type. The Weltman family, I'm guessing, doesn't have a mansion on the parking lot grounds of the first Walmart. But that's how you wanted to have this work. Successful iron operations generally had a mansion nearby at the top of a hill overlooking the furnace. So imagine the guy who built this, a fellow named Peter Egge, E-G-E. Imagine it's 2 a.m. and something doesn't seem right, and he wakes up and looks out his window, not sure something's wrong. He could throw on his bathrobe and bedroom slippers, I imagine, and in about 90 seconds walk down the hill and be over there knocking some heads together. What's going on here? So that's very literal oversight. The other reason that these mansions were typically up on a hill is a matter of social display. So, one way to think of this is the top of the social pyramid. So imagine that we listed all of the different jobs and tasks at a furnace like this. Right at the very, very top, we've got the Ironmaster, and in a social sense, his family. We'll talk about the Ironmaster's wife briefly inside too. Okay. So if you approach this building, came to the tour today, from down there, looking up, that's the way you were really supposed to see this building. So here's a photograph. This is actually the building around 1875, give or take, a little bit earlier probably. You're seeing it the way you're meant to see it. Sometimes people come by our state park and they're going down Route 233. That's the highway just on the other side of the building. And they go back and forth and they're looking at the rear of the building. That wouldn't have been much more than a horse path in the early days. There were some reasons you needed to connect down towards Caledonia, which is the next state park today. Caledonia is about 16 miles from us. And there are people who have only seen the back of this building. On one of these tours, I had someone come to this side and say, "Oh, this is so nice." Well, what do you mean? I said, "Well, it always looked kind of, unimpressive from the other side," which it does. So, top of the social pyramid, top of the social hierarchy. It just so happens that at Pine Grove Furnace, many of the workers' houses are up the hill in that direction. So from the Appalachian Trail Museum and the park office, you're going up the hill up Old Shippensburg Road. There are a lot of workers' houses up that direction. Those are company houses. That kind of undercuts my argument that we're at the top of the social pyramid here, or the work triangle. So, all of that said, we have a brick building, and do not ask me how many bricks it took. Someday I'm going to calculate that. Let's just agree that it's brick, okay? It's very thick because this style of building, the walls are holding everything up above. Every single one of these bricks was made on site. Now don't confuse these bricks with the commercial brickyard that operated from 1892 to 1907 or thereabouts, which is around the corner from our furnace. That's the brickyard day use area. Those commercial bricks are many, many decades after this building was built. So when they were starting to construct this building, they would have hand-formed the clay, probably using wooden forms, stacked it up probably in an open-air kiln arrangement, and fired them right on site. You couldn't go to Home Depot or Lowe's and get a contractor load of bricks. We know month by month the work they were doing here, and as I already said, it took about 2 years. For some reason, the painters were really slow at the end. And if you've ever had contracting work or had a house built, maybe did it yourself, you know that it just seems to drag on and on and on. When's it going to be finished? I imagine that Peter Egge and his family had much the same feeling, as it just took forever for the painting to be finished. Even the paint was almost certainly mixed right here on site. We don't know the original colors, although we might figure that out by drilling through God knows how many layers of paint on the inside. It was painted by volunteers in 2010, and I personally messed up upstairs as a volunteer, and there's a spot in the ceiling upstairs where some nice modern paint accidentally got in the ceiling, which is a slightly different color than some of the walls. That said, in the original painting, they would have mixed it here and painting and painting and painting. So, the tour takes about an hour. Obviously, we're a few minutes into it. We're going to walk through various rooms. Let's head inside. If anyone doesn't want to stick around for all that much history, if you're getting bored, if the kids are getting bored, if you left your campfire going, I don't think that's possible today, please don't be shy. Just wave and take off. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I prefer that you come back out this way, but if we're partway in the tour and you want to go out through the fancy door over there, please don't turn the lock. There's a little sign about that. So with that said, let's squeeze inside and take a look. Any questions?
You mentioned that we knew month by month how the building was progressing, the construction.
Yes.
How do we know that?
Because we have the business records. Not everything survived after all those centuries, but for example, we know from the actual records that in April of 1827, the brickmakers arrived, manufactured bricks in July. So April, May, June, July, to make all the bricks, however many they are, and don't ask me how many. In June of 27, masons began to work, and it looks like they were laying brick into October. And this is straight out of records in the state archives and other places. Cumberland County Historical Society also has some records. June of 1827, the carpenters began work. They finished by July of 28. June of 1828, plastering began. They were fast. They were done by August of 1828. But the painters are shown as being paid for their work and working here. They started September of 1827, probably following the other trades as the building was constructed, and they didn't finish, the painters, until March of 1829, and that's why we can say this is an 1829 building. So. Any other comments or questions? Okay, let's head in. Thank you. So, we're inside the Ironmasters Mansion. Now, this building serves 3 purposes today. The first is that it's an Appalachian Trail hostel. Okay, that's a funny word. It's an enemy. No, it's a hotel. Okay, and we're going to see evidence of the Appalachian Trail hikers. In fact, anyone who wants to pay their $25 can stay overnight. We'll see some of the dormitory arrangements. There's also a private room upstairs. I'll mention that briefly in a bit. So you can come stay here overnight. That's one function. It is operated by the Appalachian Trail Museum Society, and I hope you all have a chance to visit the AT Museum, which is just a few hundred yards from here. It's the old stone building. It was originally a grist mill that was first in the tax records in 1783. The second function is that you can rent this mansion for weddings and family reunions and Boy Scout troops and things like that. And that, of course, is great use for the building and also helps provide a little income to the Appalachian Trail Museum folks. And the third function is what we're doing today. It's effectively a museum. However, this is not the kind of historic house museum, and that's the term of art. It's not the sort of historic house museum where we have velvet ropes and lots of fancy old furniture and don't touch this. And you're sitting down. Don't sit down on that antique. That's not an antique. The only things in this building that are actually old and original on the interior furnishings are this Peter Egge stove over here. It's actually a 9-plate, but most people call it a 10-plate stove. And this castware or hollowware pot, which was almost certainly made here, even though it doesn't have Pine Grove written on it.
Just if you ever have to do it again. It's a new thing this year, but if we go at that part.
everything else in this building is modern on the interior. So, for example, these lovely little arrangements, the candlesticks, this thing. This is Pier 1 from China, no joke. Same thing with the decoration on the wall over there. You will notice there are some museum-grade displays, like that small sign that says visit the exhibit. Those are left over from the Cumberland County Historical Society, which in 2012, if memory serves, had their annual exhibit in Carlisle about Pine Grove Furnace. And after that annual rotating exhibit, they didn't need the displays, they donated them here. So you'll see those scattered around in a few places, along with some old photographs. The building itself is old. The doors, the hardware on the doors and windows by and large is old. Some of the windows have been replaced for efficiency, and there are other things that have been done in the interior that you can't see to improve air handling and things like that, air conditioning even. But by and large, old building, but nothing old on the inside. Okay. What was this room used for? Anybody? Cooking, kitchen. This is a particularly large fireplace, clearly meant for cooking. Even for an old building like this, it is very big. You will see lots of other fireplaces, including some that are partly boarded up, all through the building. There are lots of fireplaces. It's not clear to us that they ever used these, say, 10-plate stoves in this building, however. There is a memoir written just around the time of World War I by a woman who was born here. She was a daughter of one of the Ironmasters, William Watts. And Sarah Reed Watts, remembered the roaring fireplaces. She doesn't mention stoves at all. And I suspect that although those stoves were a major product for this furnace, they may not have used them here. They had all these chimneys, all these fireplaces, and it may in some respects have been a sign of wealth to be able to have lots of roaring and frankly inefficient fireplaces heating up the place and using lots of wood from his own land. So there's no evidence of hookups for the stoves, and that's just a curious thing because that wasn't a very important product from the early days of the furnace, which was 1770s or so, time of the American Revolution, and those stoves fell out of fashion starting maybe in the 1840s. But it does say Peter Egge, who's the guy who built this building. What was the purpose of this room originally? I don't know. You're going to hear me saying that over and over again. This was not originally a kitchen. It may have been a storeroom, a food preparation room, and it's also quite possible that some of the workers, some of the help, slept here. I think that's quite possible. If that's true, which wall would you want to be against during the winter time? Everyone's pointing at what is now a sink, plumbing over there. But imagine that huge roaring fireplace in the wintertime. You would want to be over there. In the summer, you might be tempted to say, what about being on that side? Put your bed there. Probably not, because a house like this would have had a summer kitchen. And I'm not going to show it to you today in the rain, but from the outside, you can get a sense there may have been kind of a sloping roof on the outside of the brick wall, which is the other side of that end of the house. And so probably there would have been some heat on that end. Maybe the bricks felt cold, I don't know. But in the wintertime, if I were forced to sleep here, I'd definitely put my bed up against that side. This commercial grade kitchen was arranged for, paid for by the Central Pennsylvania Conservancy, which used to be the operator of the mansion from 2010 to 2020. And they were great. They put in hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own money to upgrade the facilities. And that included this, so that, for example, if you're having a wedding and renting the whole building, you could have your caterer come here to prepare food. Today, as you can see, it's used by the Appalachian Trail hikers from day to day, and by the innkeeper, whose apartments are directly over our head. And I'm not going to show you the private apartment upstairs, but it seems likely that that may have also been used by people who are taking care of the family here. What was this room used for? I don't know. can make an educated guess, but I really don't know. It seems to me that this might have been sort of a family room, maybe an informal dining area. It's right next to the kitchen, and then as now, when people go to a house, everyone gravitates towards the kitchen. It just always seems to happen. So it is a cozy room. Can someone open up the cabinet there, the built-in little closet? So now it has books and games and so forth for the people staying here overnight. It's pretty shallow. It's one of the very few examples of a built-in storage area in the entire building. Maybe that's where you kept some plates and utensils, but we don't know. So let's talk about the Eggy family and the other early Ironmasters, owners and operators of this furnace. The furnace, whenever it started in the 1770s, before 1781 for sure, had a bunch of different families and folks who were involved. We don't know where the earliest Ironmasters Mansion was. It may have been somewhere along this hillside, but we don't know quite where it was. Have no good record of that. One of the original Ironmasters was named John Arthur, and the record's a little unclear about his sister versus his daughter, Jane Arthur. Come back to her in a minute. As you go through the American Revolution, you end up with a guy named Michael Eggy. Now that family name is E-G-E. There are several pronunciations, but everyone agrees Eggy is probably the correct way to say it. The Eggy family came over from Germany in 1738. We know the ship they came in on and came through the port of Philadelphia. They may have been indentured servants. I'll explain more about that in another room. In any event, they were quickly able to make something of themselves and got into the iron business. Several family members were involved in iron east of the Susquehanna River, and that includes Baron von Stiegel, who was related by marriage. I'm not going to tell you who he was, but look him up, a very interesting character. You end up with Michael Eggy, who's born in 1752, coming west of the Susquehanna to become an ironmaster. And by the end of the American Revolution, he's involved in several furnaces. He became first a part owner of Pine Grove Furnace and then later a full owner. He also had his furnace at Boiling Springs, which started around 1762. He didn't make that himself, but he became full owner. If any of you have been to the Carlisle Iron Works in Boiling Springs, you may remember above that beautiful little children's lake, which was water power for the furnace. Above it, there's a white mansion on a hill. That's the Eggy Mansion. Sometimes we call it the Bucher Mansion today. That was originally built around 1795 by Michael Eggy. So that's his home base. He had two other furnaces in the area. By the end of his life, he was a very wealthy man. 4 furnaces, including the one we're at today. He had 50,000 acres of land, all the associated farms, etc., etc. Now, his eldest son was Peter Eggy, who was born January 1st, 1776. That's an easy one for me to remember. The eldest son, right around the year 1800, just after getting married, came here to operate this ironworks on behalf of the father, Michael Eggy. Peter Eggy was here from around 1800 to just before he died in 1847. So he was effectively the ironmaster for the first part of his adult life. Michael Eggy, the father, again, died in 1815, and after some squabbling with siblings, Peter Eggy became the full owner and ironmaster starting in 1816. Now, I told you this building was constructed in 27 to 29, so he was in the original Ironmasters Mansion, wherever it was. And he had a growing family. In 1799, he had married Jane Arthur. Jane Arthur is a member of that Arthur family I already said were some of the probably first builders of the ironworks here, along with a family named Thornburg. There were some other investors, Loss and others. So, you have the son of an ironmaster marrying the daughter of another ironmaster. They said that was always how it worked. And that is what they actually call the iron marriages, which sounds a little bit like, something out of Game of Thrones, doesn't it? She died in 1841, and she's actually buried up on the hill in the community cemetery, which is just south of Fuller Lake. We don't know exactly where her grave is, but we do have her gravestone in the, let's see, I've got it here somewhere. There we are. So this is Jane Arthur's stone, and it's currently in the basement of the park office. It used to be on display. We don't have it on display now. We don't know which grave was hers. This is Peter Eggy. It's the only likeness we have of him. This style of portraiture, paper silhouette, was very popular around 1800 to 1810 or thereabouts. And you have to put your nose right up against it to convince yourself it's not an original. It's actually a very nice reproduction of the original, which is owned by a member of the family who's out west of here, out towards the Midwest, and some family members went all the way to California during the 19th century. Anyhow, they donated this beautiful reproduction of Peter Eggy. And I kind of like it because it looks to me, if it's around 1800 or so, he's into early middle age. He looks bald. He looks like he's got a few extra pounds, and he looks very proud of himself. He's got his long coat on. So that's Peter Eggy. It was rumored in a 20th century newspaper that there was a portrait painted of Jane Arthur, but never seen it. I'm not sure it actually existed. So these were people who could have spent a lot of money on images of themselves and their families, and they did not. It appears that they were just too busy making iron, making some money, although this was a tough business. And in fact, Peter Eggy effectively went bankrupt, and he had his sons who were living here run the place for a couple of years, and eventually they also lost it. And so from 1800 to the 1830s, he was owning it and running it, and then it changed hands, and it ends up in the hands of a guy named William Watts, who was married into the family through the Carlisle Ironworks end. So he allowed his wife's aunt and uncle and their children to stay here for a while. So again, Peter Eggy was here for a very long time. Any comments, questions about the Eggy family?
On the right.
Yes.
Would you hold that picture up so we can see it back here? I think it's fascinating because it's shaped like the ironworks shape.
That's an interesting point. It is certainly ornamental. It's very large. It's about this tall off the ground, and probably would have been on top of her grave, and we have it in a vertical case, actually, that photograph. So it's quite large, and it says sacred to the memory of Jane, consort of Peter Eggy. That's just language they used for his wife. I've had some people say, well, that sounds a little suspicious. No, it's just language they used in that era. So again, she died 1841, he died 1847. Okay. I want everyone to just turn around. I don't think we can all file over to it, but you see on the wall right there, it says the Eggy Mansion. That photograph is in the sort of authorized biography of a guy named Jay Cook. And we'll talk about him a little bit upstairs, but since that's here, I just want to show you that exact photograph. Everyone, if you look over here, I've got the book showing that exact picture reproduced from this book. This is a 1907 original edition of his 2-volume biography. Jay Cook became the owner here in 1864. He bought it from William Watts. And again, we'll talk more about him. He's a very interesting guy. We'll discuss Jay Cook upstairs. But since that picture is here, I got to show you the picture now. So, Jay Cook, financier of the Civil War. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? Let's go into this room. And by the way, after this tour, you don't need to run away. If you want to stay inside and look around, read some of the things on the wall afterwards, you're very welcome to do that. I do hope, however, if you don't need to head home in another half hour or so, that you might go over to the Appalachian Trail Museum, which I believe is going to be up until 4 o'clock today. Also, you might want to visit the State Park office, which has a small museum about the size of this room, which is filled with stuff about the iron industry and a number of Peter Eggy stoves and some castware, all sorts of interesting things in there. And that's also open until 4 o'clock today. Okay, if we have everybody, this room We used to call the boardroom. What was it originally used for? I don't know. I have a guess. But we used to have a lot of tables set up in here, and if you were having a business retreat or some other meeting and renting the building, that would perhaps be helpful to have. Today, it is used partly by the Abolition Trail Museum to honor their Hall of Famers. So those are the walking sticks along the wall over there. My guess is that this room might have originally been a fancy dining room, perhaps. Just a guess. And one reason is it's not too hard to get to the kitchen inside, but also if the weather's good, you could send people around. And there was a door that we don't use today next to where I was standing in the other room. It would be easy to come around there if you wanted to. You could even come here. This building has a lot of doors. A lot of doors. And you know, you might say, well, why? I mean, yes, it makes it easy to get around, at least in good weather. You'll notice the floor layout, there aren't really central corridors connecting the building rooms, so you need to go from room to room to room, pretty much. There's another reason, something I didn't mention about the Egge family. So when Peter Egge first came here, he was newly married, growing family, 1800. They were living in that first building that served as an Ironmasters Mansion. He becomes full owner in 1816 after his father Michael had died. But 3 years later, disaster strikes. They had a fire in 1819, in the middle of the winter. We don't know the cause of the fire. The newspaper articles are characteristically just very short. Mr. Peter Egge lost all his possessions. That's all they said. So the first Ironmasters Mansion burned down. Now, if you survived a fire, as far as we know, they got the family out, maybe they grabbed the bed and a few clothes. That's what you did in those days. You grabbed your bed after the children got out of a burning building. You might psychologically want to know where the door is for the rest of your life. Just something that I like to think about, that if you survived that house fire in 1819 and built another house, you probably want to have a way to get out of it. Whether it was a candle or something like that, a chimney fire, we don't know. Probably not an industrial accident, although the furnace is very close. In January, the furnace would have been shut down. So they then moved into a second structure. Was it this building? No, this wasn't built to 1829, I told you. So from 1819 through the 1820s, they were somewhere else. That's the second Ironmasters Mansion. The tax record suggests there was a wooden structure that served that purpose. We don't know exactly where it was. It probably was not on this foundation, but we don't know for sure. In any event, they then had an unfortunate event that followed the fire. That was the Panic of 1819, which had already the summer before started to hit large factory owners, let's call it mill owners, and other heavy industry. It was an economic downturn, and it is likely that through the 1820s, Peter Egge did not have a lot of cash or credit. In those days, almost everything was credit. In any event, he didn't have the resources, I think, to build this style of mansion immediately after his house had burned down in 1819. By the end of the 1820s, things are doing better. So he starts constructing this in 1827 as the US economy is starting to come back. He could probably convince people that he could sell iron and be able to pay them eventually. And something else happened right after he finished this building in 1830. He constructed Laurel Forge. Today, that's the other end of our state park, that's Laurel Lake. But that forge is where pig iron from the furnace was made into wrought iron. So things were going pretty well at the end of the 1820s. He builds this house, he builds the forge right afterwards. Now, I mentioned Jane Arthur Egge, his wife. This room, and perhaps function as a fancy dining room, is a good moment to mention her and to point out that one of the other duties of the Ironmaster's wife, besides just being the social center of everything, would have been to educate her family and the workers' families. And so I have here an advert from 1813, quite early. It says, a teacher wanted at Pine Grove Furnace, which is within 14 miles of Carlisle, and where about 30 scholars can be had to commence with. A good teacher of the English language and arithmetic will meet with encouragement by applying there. So she's advertising in the newspaper for a teacher. He would have been given room and board and probably paid on a per capita basis, per student. That's probably why she says about 30 scholars. Although knowing how small the population was here, I wonder if she might have been inflating the number a little bit. In any event, that is quite early, 1813. Another thing that the ironmaster's wife traditionally was in charge of is the health of the community. Now, you don't have a doctor nearby. There were doctors in the big towns, and they might swing through, particularly if they were requested. But pretty much anything that was going on, someone's child was sick, someone broke a leg at work, they would probably come here, knock on the door, one of the side doors, not the fancy front door, and say, you know, is the missus in? Is Mrs. Eggy here? We could use her advice, even if she had absolutely no training whatsoever. William Watts, a later Ironmaster, his wife was trained in homeopathic medicine. So maybe that was a good thing, because medicine in that era was pretty harsh. So, was it a dining room? You decide. I really don't know. Any comments or questions? Thoughts? Okay, let's go on to the next room. Again, we're going to have to squeeze in, and it's only going to get smaller from here, folks. This is brief. It's a somewhat smaller room, but that's deceptive. So we have drywall, and we have 2 modern bathrooms. But when we go upstairs, you'll see the room above us. It's the same layout, much larger. So those were put in, obviously, in the 20th century for modern conveniences. That's why over on that side, there's a fireplace that is only a couple feet from the wall. You wouldn't choose to lay the floor plan out that way. That's one of those many, many fireplaces I mentioned. Notice the woodwork here. In the corners of each room, you've got a little round design. Each room is subtly different. So you'll notice when we go into the next one, and especially in the fancy room on the other side of the foyer there, the corners, each one's slightly different. The interior woodworking is probably based on a well-known builder's guide that predates this building by about a decade or so. So all of this woodwork was almost certainly worked on and created right here on site. They didn't just go into Home Depot and buy, you know, long lengths of pre-milled beautiful woodwork there. Today, this room is where the Appalachian Trail hikers can get on a computer. And by the way, there is good Wi-Fi in the building if you want to use your iPhone after the tour. The password is written outside the front door. This room here is actually the fanciest room in the entire Ironmasters Mansion. And you can tell that if you look closely at the beautiful surround of the fireplace. It's beautiful woodwork, and also there's marble. It's the only place in this building that has marble surround like that. You'll also notice when you stick your nose in, there are 2 arched doors. However, one of them isn't really a door. It looks like it should be, but it's not. It's an alcove, it has some shelves, and I like to believe that Peter Eggy might have had his personal desk, and you can imagine him entertaining business guests here. I don't know for sure, but I think this must have been the fancy parlor. A big house like this would have a parlor. That's where you keep the children out, and you make sure your shoes are clean before you go in. So if you were an honored guest, someone important, someone maybe a potential investor, customer, you'd be coming in that door, and you'd come in here, and they take care of you. Okay. So when we look at this building in this room, you can't see it from the outside, there is evidence of another window that was blocked off. In fact, there are a number of other places where doors and windows along this side of the building were blocked off with bricks. It looks to have been done sometime not long after the building was constructed. Why they put in those openings and then bricked them up, I don't know. But from the outside, you can see it pretty clearly. So many people think they know that the Ironmasters Mansion here was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Right, so that's in the decades before the American Civil War. I have my doubts. We'll talk about that, but let's go back a little earlier and talk about slavery. So you say, hang on, we're in the North, Pennsylvania, Quakers. Slavery, what do you mean? Well, in fact, all of the colonies were involved in the enslavement of people, and Pennsylvania had many slaves. We are only 30 miles from the Mason-Dixon line in Maryland, which, even though it was North Union state during the Civil War, was still a slave state. In many ways, Pine Grove Furnace and other parts of southern Pennsylvania looked south to Maryland and Virginia in terms of business and social issues. So here at Pine Grove Furnace, there were enslaved workers for the first 30 or 40 years of operation. And northern industrial slavery is one of those things that is just overlooked. Many of the enslaved people in Pennsylvania were working at iron operations and tanneries and places like that, sometimes only part of the year. Now, I showed you that nice paper silhouette of Peter Egge, and oh, what a nice looking guy. Well, let me tell you, he was a slave master. Okay, now this is before this building was constructed, but he personally owned 3 people. It's strange to have to say that. One of them was a baby. Okay, he is registered in 1801, having a new baby, probably born to an enslaved woman who he owned. In addition, Peter Egge, when he got here in 1800, would have been overseeing the enslaved workers who were either owned by or leased by his father, Michael. Remember, he's based elsewhere, but he's the actual owner here. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Pennsylvania had an abolition act, right? Didn't they get rid of slavery? Well, it's the Gradual Abolition Act. It's passed in 1780, but it says that if you were born after the act passed in 1780 to an enslaved mother, you remained as a slave, they didn't quite call it that, until you were 28 years old. And if you were born to an enslaved mother before the act passed in 1780, you remained enslaved for life unless you were in some way freed or you freed yourself. So Peter Egge here at Pine Grove Furnace in the year 1810, in the census then, has 30 people in his quote household, but I don't think all 30 of them were in this building. And the census shows Peter Egge's household includes, out of those 30 people, 14 enslaved individuals. 14 out of 30. So slavery is part of the story of Pine Grove Furnace. Between 1810 to 1820, slavery tapers off rapidly, and it appears there were no more enslaved people here, and in fact, in Cumberland County and many other parts of Pennsylvania, slavery decreased rapidly. The Gradual Abolition Act was amended in the following decades, and Pennsylvania eventually, before the Civil War, did completely outlaw slavery. But it is very much part of the story of Pine Grove Furnace and of Mr. Peter Egge, who later built this house. In addition to enslaved workers, of course those are black people, we're going to have white people who are also not free. We call those indentured servants. And we know that there were plenty of them here at Pine Grove Furnace and elsewhere. So simultaneously, in this place, you'd have a free white worker. In 1810, for example, of those 30 people at Peter Egge's central operation, there were 3 free African Americans. We had the 14 enslaved workers, and we also had some indentured servants. And so what's an indentured servant? That is a poor English or Irish or German person, typically, who comes over on a ship, and basically he sells his time, or a whole family would come over, so more often men than women, might be a whole family, and they come over, and for a period of a few years, it varied, very rarely in the period we're talking about was it more than 7 years, it might only be 2 or 3 years. So they're what we can call bound workers, just like the enslaved people. And there are plenty of accounts of white indentured servants and black enslaved workers who ran off together from a particularly difficult master, difficult situation. We don't have any runaway slave adverts for Pine Grove Furnace. We do have some for Michael Egge's operation over in Boiling Springs. What we do have from Pine Grove, and this is 1785, is a newspaper advert that says $8 reward ran away from Pine Grove Furnace in the month of April. An indentured, we'd say today, English servant man named Thomas Rabson, about 40 years of age, 5 foot, 5 or 6 inches, wants the forefinger of his right hand. What does that mean? He wants it because it's missing. It's a different way of saying it's gone. He's missing a finger. He has dark complexion, short brown hair, purple colored vest with green back, brown overalls, etc. Why are they describing this runaway's clothing in such detail? Anybody know? It's his only clothing. Clothing was very hard to come by, very expensive. It was all made by hand, right? So when someone is being sought in a newspaper ad, you generally describe their clothing and what they, maybe they took one extra coat or something. You describe that in great detail because it's unlikely they're going to be able to quickly change to something else. Don't know what happened to Thomas Rabson, whether they got him again. So this is under some earlier owners. Thornburg and William Lusk was one of the early iron investors here since 1785. So we have northern industrial slavery, we have indentured servitude. It's all the more interesting. Oh, and one more thing, I'll just show this to you, you can look at it later. I do have here a photo of one of the business archives for Pine Grove Furnace. This is in the state archives in Harrisburg. And what it says is we have Thomas Thornburg, early ironmaster, this is 1787, who's being paid for the work of 2 individuals. One of them, it says, 4 months' work of Negro Peter. So this is an enslaved man named Peter. He's not given the honor of a last name. And Peter is listed as filling. So he was doing what's considered semi-skilled, dropping raw materials on the top of the furnace for 4 months. 6 months and 1.5 days of work of ditto. So again, it's this man, Peter. He's enslaved, and he's doing some other work. Peter appears regularly in the records as handling the horses and helping the colliers. He did a lot of different jobs here. And so he's in the records frequently. He's enslaved. And then the same entry, 10 months, 11 days work of J. Cully. James Cully was an indentured servant. From his name, I'm guessing he might be English or Irish. So in one little business record, in just a few lines, we have both an enslaved man and an indentured man. And their master is getting the wages for the labor that they're doing. Okay, so it's all the more interesting with that history that if we jump just a few decades later, now we're into the ownership of William Watts. Peter Egge's wife Jane has died. He goes in 1847 to his daughter's house and dies at the foot of the mountain. He's buried down there. So in the 1840s and 50s, up to the Civil War, the place is owned by a guy named William Watts, who was a prominent Whig. We won't get into the politics, but we don't know for sure if he's against slavery, but he probably didn't like it. His elder brother, Frederick Watts, was a well-known judge and lawyer and briefly owned this place, but was not an ironmaster here. And Frederick Watts was legalistically against slavery, and so William Watts probably didn't like it either. We know that Pine Grove Furnace in that period was used as a stop on the Underground Railroad. Okay. We don't know for sure whether this building was used in that way. It's something you hear all the time. There are some good reasons to question it. I have that newspaper article as a handout. You're welcome to take a look at it. In brief, I think this would have been a stupid place to try to hide someone because all eyes are upon this building. Pine Grove Iron Works stretches for 2 miles across the mountain. There's a whole lot of different outbuildings and stables and other workers' houses. There are probably much smarter places to hide someone, including if the slave catchers came through, which they did. It would be a lot easier to scoot out the back of a barn that's partway up the hill and disappear into the woods if you needed to, compared to getting out of here. Contrary to rumors, there are no tunnels connecting this building to anything else. We do have an unfinished basement on this side of the building. It's finished on that side, unfinished here. And so this mythology, I'll say, has developed that they hid what we today call freedom seekers, fugitives. These are enslaved people trying to get away from their masters. The story is that they hid in this little space over here under the stairs. And because of the crowd, I think what we'll do is let you look in here, look over there, and then we'll start upstairs. But you'll see that there is a hatch in the floor. Please don't fall down that hatch. You will see there's an unfinished basement. It's not very tall. So that could be a place you would hide someone because the hatch is not obvious. But those of you standing right at the base of the stairs, what's under your feet, please? What do you see? A hatch. It's the same space. Probably that's just to make it easy to put things in storage. Maybe even if you're mopping the floor, you can let it drip down in, okay? So it's not actually that well hidden. If the slave catchers from Maryland and Virginia came through, believe me, you couldn't keep them out. It would be very difficult. So they would come in and look around and see if the quarry, the people they were seeking were here. They were not idiots. They would look under the stairs. So another reason I don't think it would be smart to keep anyone here, any of these freedom seekers, is that the Ironmaster would therefore be in temporary possession of stolen property. Okay, people as stolen property. And there was a famous case up in Boiling Springs in 1847 where Daniel Kaufman, who was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, was for a few days helping out 2 families, 13 people who were heading north from Maryland, trying to escape slavery. And the slave catchers got there just afterwards, and Daniel Kaufman was dragged through the court system and had a very substantial legal judgment against him, which abolitionists and others helped to pay afterwards. But that 1847-48 case was very well known, and it just wouldn't make sense for William Watts, as the richest guy in the area, to be caught with those self-stealing people, if you will, self-stealing property. So he needed plausible deniability. There were some very brave folks who did keep fugitives in their homes. There were plenty of them, but I just don't believe an Ironmaster here would do it. Okay. The other reason is that that space downstairs backs onto the bake oven in the unfinished part, the finished part of the basement, and I imagine it would get really warm down. So for all those reasons, I don't think that it's this building where the Underground Railroad was. Nonetheless, it's interesting to consider that only a few decades after there had been enslaved people here, the same location, the same ironworks, was part of the Underground Railroad. Any comments or questions about all of that? Okay, we're doing okay on time. We're coming up on 2 o'clock. Let's spend 5 minutes upstairs, and then the last stop usually is outside through that door. Let's see what the rain is doing, and we can think about whether we want to do it, maybe standing here again. So please, take a look at the hatch. Don't go down. Take a look inside this lovely, fancy parlor over there, and I'll meet you upstairs.
Okay, so this is the secret room that Andre was talking about. We came back in to get some footage. Please do not go down the ladder. So here's the hatch that he was talking about. You can see, there's the ladder. There you go. Very, very cool.
So Shannon just showed you guys the secret room with the, and she lifted the door. And I'm going to show you on the other side of it, just down from it, is another secret latch. And we think, he thinks that these connected. So I'm going to show you guys this one. All right, so the secret door is here. And you saw this, the latch and everything. All right, so down here at the end of the staircase is the other one. Shannon, lift that up. Can you lift it? No.
Okay.
All right, so they have it blocked off. Okay. All right. Anyhow, they think that those were connected.
So, let's talk about the later years briefly. I told you William Watts became Ironmaster here in that period right before the Civil War. He eventually sells the place to the business interests of J. Cook in 1864. So that's during the war. Iron prices are up. It's probably a good time to get out and retire. William Watts went to Mechanicsburg. He died there. Who is J. Cook? How many of you have ever heard of J. Cook before? One person. Usually it's 0, so good for you. 1 or 2, okay. So J. Cook was once well known. Everyone in the country knew his name. The same way that you probably know Warren Buffett, or you know Bill Gates, or I don't know, Elon Musk, someone like that. Very wealthy person. J. Cook for a while was the richest guy in the entire United States. Everyone knew him because of his contribution to the Union victory in the Civil War. In fact, his 2-volume biography, published 2 years after he died with his help, his family's help, is Jay Cook, Financier of the Civil War. So the story is, Jay Cook's born in Ohio, 1821. He does some, interesting early jobs, becomes, if you will, a classic Philadelphia banker, and makes a lot of money and kind of is in semi-retirement at a young age before the Civil War breaks out. He then decides to help the Union cause by selling bonds to the public. This was quite innovative. And it was really understood by everyone that in order to win that war, you needed to have a lot of money. Wars are always expensive, modern wars especially so. So by the end of the war, taking just a little bit of skim off the top in a sense, he had sold bonds that won the war. In 1864, he's looking for other things to do with all his money, and he expands from banking into a life insurance company and several different iron operations, a couple of them in New York State. And he bought Pine Grove Furnace. Now, he's based in Philadelphia, but he loved to go hunting for upland birds. He was a big trout fisherman, and so he went to central Pennsylvania to Williamsport and also here to go fishing and looking for birds and so forth. So Jay Cook is really famous. He's also famous because he overextended himself trying to fund the Northern Pacific Railroad in the 1870s. He was forced to sell the ironworks here in November of 1872 for what we today could call cash flow problems. And this was embarrassing because just a few months earlier in 1872, the entire area around us was named Cook Township, and that's C-O-O-K-E. Here's a photograph of Jay Cook around that era. So in 1873, things basically collapsed. Called the Panic of 73. It was due to international banking problems, but it was largely blamed on Jay Cook's company and issues relating to the bonds for the Northern Pacific Railroad. He lost his fortune, made some money back in the following years. It was said he made 2 fortunes but lost one of them. A slightly less wealthy man, but still pretty wealthy, repurchased Pine Grove Furnace in 1877 and upgraded the whole facility. It's interesting that he did that because by then the charcoal iron industry was obviously sort of an antique, but it made a great product. And there were some discerning customers who still liked it, even though it was quite expensive to make iron using charcoal like they did here. In any event, Jay Cook was really the last owner of this place. He brought in a guy named Jackson Fuller to help run it. And here is Jackson Fuller and his wife Carolyn. They're also in a photograph downstairs. And here is Jackson Fuller as an old man standing on the lawn just outside this building. So this is at a July 4th picnic. And it was said that on a big holiday like July 4th, Jay Cook would come from Philadelphia or wherever he was, and he would hand out little scissors to all the girls and little pocket knives to all the boys. Something you couldn't do today. If a middle-aged man's handing sharp metal instruments to school children, it's not going to go well. In any event, there's another guy I want to mention in connection with these later years. He's another fellow from Ohio originally. He's born in 1822. He became famous because of the American Civil War, really internationally famous. And he and Jay Cook, after the war, met each other and became friends. Who was that? General Ulysses S. Grant, later President of the United States. In his long life, Jay Cook had the ear of 5 U.S. presidents, but in particular, he had an affinity for Ulysses S. Grant. They didn't know each other during the Civil War, but both of them rose to extreme prominence because of the war. And so whenever Grant was in the Philadelphia area, he would always stay at Jay Cook's mansion just outside of town. And we know that the First Lady, Julia Dent Grant, came here and stayed in this building. It's not clear whether President Grant ever was here. He might have been, but the closest I can put him is on the Cumberland Valley Railroad. The reason Julia Grant and some of her children, especially her youngest, her son, used to come here is that Julia Grant, the First Lady, had a sister who had married someone, minister, up in Newville, which is at the other side of the valley. So she had reason to come here to escape the heat of Washington, D.C. in the summertime. However, this never served as the summer residence of the president and his family. They had someplace on the Jersey coast. In any event, First Lady was here, maybe not, Ulysses S. Grant himself. Okay, the last thing I'd like to do is go downstairs and let's see how hard it's raining. There's something outside I'm going to show you. Before we do that, any comments or questions about the later years of Pine Grove Furnace? It went out of business, by the way, making iron in 1895, but they had other operations, brick making, ice, an amusement park just a mile from here on their own property. Jay Cook died in Philadelphia in 1905. J. Jackson Fuller died in this building in 1904. But by then, the heavy industry was basically over. Any comments or questions about the later decades? Okay. I want you all to look at this photograph, and then we're going to go downstairs and talk about it. Here's the building we're in. In fact, the windows there are right behind this tree. That's the front door. Outside, there's a gravel parking lot, and notice this large building. Take a look at the photo, and then we're going to go downstairs and go find that building. So I asked you all to take a look at that photograph upstairs on the wall from the Historical Society display. Ask yourself what used to be there. It's especially true here at Pine Grove Furnace. The gravel parking lot for the general store is actually the charcoal storage barn or coal barn. Down by the furnace, the parking lot on one side there where the bathrooms are today, was the blacksmith shop and carpenter shop. If you go down to Laurel Lake area, the area below the dam, there's an overflow gravel. Ask yourself what used to be there. It's especially true here at Pine Grove Furnace. The gravel parking lot for the general store is actually the charcoal storage barn or coal barn. Down by the furnace, the parking lot on one side there where the bathrooms are today, was the blacksmith shop and carpenter shop. If you go down to Laurel Lake area, the area below the dam, there's an overflow gravel parking lot. That was where the forge used to be. That was Peter Reggie built in 1830. So gravel parking lots are generally telling you where something else was. They didn't have gravel parking lots in the 18th and 19th century. This space was the large company store, right next to the owner's house. Think about that. Remember I joked about the Walton family having a Walmart next to them? That's kind of what the situation was here. The entire community would have been going in and out of this three-story building. Downstairs was storage. The main floor, up a flight of stairs, was the main sales area. And then upstairs you had a residence for the storekeeping. All that's left of it is this kind of weird brick and stone thing. That's the core of the steps up the building. In this photograph, you can see those steps. The steps are on the other side by the driveway entrance today. Okay. So this is an arrangement that doesn't use cash. It's all credit and record keeping. The workers were paid outside the paymasters. If you go around and look from the general store, you can see it. There's stairs up and stairs down. They'd file up there. There'd be a ledger. Okay, Joe, this is how much you made working in the past week. And then they'd go down the stairs. There'd be another ledger inside this vanished building here. And have you ever heard the expression, you know, it's from the song, St. Peter, don't you call me, I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. That's when you or your family owe more money here in the ledger than you owe over there. It's a little bit like having a credit card bill that you can't pay off. Right? So what happened to this large building? Well, you know, it's right here. When the iron company lands were sold to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they finished that in 1913. Commonwealth takes over, begins opening it up as a recreation area. There were still about a dozen iron workers' families here and houses up on the hill. They kept this building operating as what had been the company store, and now it's what we can call the general store. It's the community store. The Commonwealth brought in a fellow named Charles H. Cobean, who had been a dry goods merchandiser in Gettysburg, so a little bit south of us. He sold his business, came up here, and he's operating it, and a fire happens, a structure fire, in October of 1915, burns it to the ground. The newspaper account says that Mr. Cobean was asleep upstairs. His apartment's on the third floor of this building. I think this may be him in this photograph sitting on the steps. He's got some fancy clothing on. And importantly, if you look really closely, let me pass it around. Well, here you go. If you look very closely, he's got a dog in between his knees. The newspaper account of the fire says that he had 3 little dogs that he let run loose in the main floor of the building at night to deter thieves. There were break-ins at various buildings. It happened. And the newspaper says he was awoken by the dogs, realized the building was on fire, and escaped. Doesn't tell us if the dogs got out. I sure hope they did. building was a total loss. Embers from that burning structure, right here, I mean the wall of that huge building was probably right about here, landed on the roof of the mansion. And they had to do a bucket brigade. Everyone knows what that is, bucket brigade? Ladder, you've got people running over to a well, maybe the stream down there, Mountain Creek. Buckets, spill half of it. By the time it gets up to the top of the ladder, you splash it, you just keep that going. They managed to put out the fire on the roof of the mansion so that we still have it today. And by the way, a historian many decades ago thought that this building burned. Maybe in the 1870s it did not. It was a confusion over a different building. So this building never burned. This is the original from 1829, even though you'll sometimes read that it did. And we did almost lose it in October of 1915. They put that out. This was a total loss. They transferred the post office and general store function into what today we just call the general store, former mule stables right over this. Last curious point. Apparently the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania did not trust Charles Cobein's story because they kicked him out. I don't know if they thought it was arson, it's inside job, what the story is, but they got rid of him. He was still the postmaster, which is a federal position, so he was postmaster until December, the end of December of 1915. But he was kicked out and had to go back to Gettysburg. He did okay for himself though. In later years, he was involved in the modern layout of the Gettysburg battlefield, and in particular, he was the manager for a while of the cyclorama painting, which you can still see in Gettysburg. So he did okay after this disaster here. Building's gone. They did preserve the core of the steps, but what do you do with a spot that had a building fire? You turn it into a gravel parking lot. So that's the story. I'm very happy to take questions. It's about a quarter after the hour, a little past that. Thank you so much for your attention and for coming out in what's just a little bit of rain. We're so lucky it's not pouring right now, but it may come back. Thank you. Very well. So another interesting part of the history here at the Ironmasters Mansion is that a Civil War general was born here. So what do I mean? The guy who had this building built in 1829 was Peter Ege, E-G-E. So Peter Ege, the Ironmaster, was here with his own family, and his sons then go on to have their kids. And so there were 3 generations crowded into this building. And in particular, there's a guy who was also named Peter Ege after his grandfather. He's born in 1835 in this building. Of course, in those days, you were born at home and you probably died at home, right? And so this guy, Peter Ege, was moved, he moved with his family out to Illinois. A lot of the Ege family moved out to the Midwest and beyond in the mid-19th century. And this Peter Ege volunteered in the Civil War for the Union, was a colonel, and then right at the end of the war was promoted, what they called a brevet promotion. That's kind of a temporary promotion, often done to increase people's pay at the end and as a little bit of an award. So he was a brevet brigadier general. So I can say with a straight face that a Civil War general was born in this building.
Wow, very cool.
And he's named Peter Ege after his grandfather who built the building. So our friends group, the Friends of Pine Grove Furnace State Park, is always happy to have memberships and donations. And of course, we sell merchandise at the park office. We have our Fall Furnace Fest that raises money. We sell firewood at the campground. But one of our fundraisers is the Iron Run, which is a half marathon through the trails of Pine Grove Furnace and the Michaud State Forest. And it's also a 5K, the Turple Challenge. And those run at the same time on June 10th this year, the second Saturday of the month of June. So we're always looking for more runners to sign up, and we need volunteers for this half-day event. And that's a big fundraiser for us also.
Sounds great. We will provide the information below.
If you go online to my Friends Group website, so this is www.friendsofpinegrove.org, there's a documents section, and we have a bunch of things from the state park, but also from a lot of my history stuff. There's something I call the hike through history, and you can print that out and do it yourself.
Was that too, or is that different?
That's
Oh, it's
different.
Like
That's a self-guided walking tour of the history sites right here. A hike through history goes up through Michelle State Forest. I do lead a guided hike for that a couple times during the year. I do have one coming up at the end of May, I think. You can also get the kayaking history, so you can go down the boat rental, go out in the water and do that yourself, and just sit in the water and look at various things. Yeah, so when did the mansion serve its function today? It was used as actually an apartment building, so people could rent various rooms, I guess 3 or 4 different families, through the 1950s and 60s, I believe. By the 1970s, it was really falling apart. And believe it or not, in the early 1970s, the state was discussing whether they could even save the mansion. It was in terrible shape at that point. I don't think anyone was using it for rentals anymore. And so in 1976, we had the bicentennial, and there was a renewed interest in history. And I think as a result of that, in the very early 80s, there was financial, commitments, and the federal government put a lot of money into this building. So it's a state park, but they got federal money, and it was redone in the 1980s, and that's when the American Youth Hostels came in. So the answer to your question is 1980s, but then unfortunately AYH wasn't taking as good care of it towards the end, and so they got kicked out, unfortunately, and it was redone again for the Central Pennsylvania Conservancy occupancy in 2010, 2020. But really, it was after it was redone in the very early 80s. They spent money. In fact, the porch didn't extend this far. That was expanded for modern use. The wood was rotting. The interior was in terrible shape. I've seen photographs of it. So we're lucky we still have it. It's in such beautiful shape now. Yeah. I get a little worried sometimes during weddings and something like that. People are dancing in there, and they're jumping up and down. And it is an old house. I mean, it dates 1829, so however many years that's going to be, going on almost 200. Yeah. So I worry when people get a little rough at her.
So, Missy, one of the hikers asked you that?
Yeah, a few hikers have been asking me that lately.
Sure.
When it became a hostel.
American Youth Hostels in the 80s, but then it got redone again in 2010, Central Pennsylvania Conservancy.
Yeah, okay, awesome.
And of course, now the Abolition Trail Museum Society. Pull the door behind you if you can a little bit. The stairs must not have been originally here because it's obvious there must have been stairs going up that way. There is, a washer, dryer, and utility space over there for the mansion. This is awkward, so watch your head. We don't normally take the public tour down here, but I'm going to show you guys something real special.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Let's ignore the modern ductwork. It's very nice to have air conditioning in this building. It's miserably hot in the summer, but this is a bake oven which they could have used winter and summer. So, we talk about a summer kitchen. Very typical. You wouldn't want to have, your huge fireplace upstairs operating. But this could have been used all through the year. And it is falling apart a little bit. We need to do some renovations, but it's just lovely. So the back of this extends into that unfinished basement. And although there is a little dividing supporting wall, it would have been really hot and stuffy on the other side. So it's not, to me, very likely to have been a good place to hide, especially if this was operating and during the summer you couldn't have stayed in there very long.
So is that the wooden, was that for firewood or something? Or?
So there's just an access way to get to the other side of the basement.
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, no more ductwork.
now it's filled with ductwork, unfortunately, and you can see the unfinished stonework. You could barely stand up in there. It's not good, but you can actually see the interior structure of the building. The thick brick. Some of those bricks at the top are old and original. The bricks to the left above the utility boxes probably date to that renovation in the early 1980s. I had some federal money and renovated. There was a spot upstairs where in the kitchen, part of the plaster in the corner ceiling came down. And you could see the wood lathing from that building in the 1820s, and there was horsehair hanging down.
Wow.
So you'd have strips of wood, horsehair, and then plastered, no drywall back then. Took real skill to do that on a overhead surface. Yeah. We had it repaired. I say we, you know, the park and the mansion. And I wish we had kind of left it open. In fact, the innkeeper at the time, we talked about putting a piece of plexiglass.
I was gonna say.
Because during my tours, for a little while until it got fixed, we could look up and say, see the interior structure of the building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's always cool to me. I love to see that kind of stuff. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us today as we went wandering out yonder here in Pine Grove Furnace State Park. A fantastic tour that was given to us, historical tour by Weltman, who is the chair of the Friends of Pine Grove Furnace State Park. Fantastic.
Yeah, we learned
a lot.
Yeah.
We're going to continue talking to everybody. Some really interesting, fun people to talk to. There's some thru hikers here. I'm pretty sure.
Fresh Grounds.
Yes, Fresh Grounds
Yeah,
is here.
Miss-
We're
Missy the
hoping
innkeeper told us the
to
Fresh
run into
Grounds is
him,
here.
so we're hoping to get a chance to talk to him. But anyhow, we've had a lot of fun, and we're going to continue having fun. We'll see you guys later. Bye. So here we were here today for Andre to do the historical tour here at the Ironmasters, and Fresh Grounds here. This is Van. We're hoping we get to run into him. So we're going to go down to the general store and see if he might be down there.